Well, Dr. Cornel West announced his resignation in a letter to the Harvard dean that he actually tweeted out. He said, "This is my candid letter of resignation to my Harvard dean. I try to tell the unvarnished truth about the decadence in our market-driven universities. Let us bear witness against the spiritual rot." Ryan, what did you think about this announcement?
Well, I think that an academia that can not find a place for one of the great intellectual heavyweights of the last half century
Absolutely.
Is utterly broken and should be ashamed of itself. So this is Harvard Divinity School. This is after his time both at Harvard and at Princeton. And I think that it's also tinged with racism. And I want to read one line from his resignation speech where he says, "All my courses were subsumed under Afro-American religious studies, including those on existentialism, American democracy, and the conduct of life." And then he goes on with another litany of complaints about the way that he was treated, both personally and spiritually and professionally. And the idea that you would look at Cornel West and say that the only place his classes belong is the Afro-American Religious Studies Department is not a knock on the Afro-American Religious Studies Department, but it misunderstands the profound and transcendental nature of his life's work. Mm-hmm. Like he is somebody who has done more to try to bridge the racial divide and to try to connect poor whites, poor blacks, poor brown people. In a common cause against those who are oppressing them. And to see him treated this way is just an incredible indictment of not just this school, but I think of all of academia.
Yes, a lot of his letter is actually about, interestingly enough, about some sort of the nitty-gritty of his negotiations with the school over pay. And it seems, to your earlier point, outrageous that at Harvard, which is supposedly the glistening example of America's academic system, they could not work this out with Dr. Cornel West, of any person that they should be bending over backwards to accommodate. At that institution, it is Cornel West, because he is somebody who is doing the necessary and difficult scholarship right now when so many people are shrinking away from that task because it's not politically comfortable and it's not, I guess, rewarding financially in this moment, but he's doing it. And I mean, the fact that they couldn't find a place for him, to your point, I think that's a great way to put it, that they couldn't find a place for him, that they weren't, instead of, balking at his request, that they wouldn't even be bending over backwards to accommodate him. That's a statement in and of itself.
Right. If they couldn't make it work, it means they didn't want to make it work. And he's also known not just as a scholar who shaped his field, but as an incredible mentor and teacher. So you have a lot of scholars in academia who do great scholarship, they do great work, but they're useless when it comes to actually teaching, which is allegedly one of the functions of a university. That was not the case with Dr. West. He's also extremely selfless. I moderated a panel last week or the week before that he was on with Julian Assange's brother and Julian Assange's father. He drove down from New York to Washington, D.C. to the National Press Club to do this panel. And then when it was over, got back in his car and drove back to New York. Not for any money, and not because it's a flashy kind of event that's gonna get him a lot of notoriety. He just felt like it was his obligation. It was his moral responsibility to do this. He came down and did it. Turned back around.
Well, and you can see the same principle in his letter of resignation, that he's somebody who is doing this because he says in the letter, he talks about, I hoped and prayed I could still end my career with some semblance of intellectual intensity and personal respect. How wrong I was. And that's such a sad statement on his path through our academic institutions, our elite academic institutions in America, that somebody like Dr. Cornel West couldn't have the space for him, but he also couldn't end his career. I mean, he's doing it on his own terms here. And I wouldn't say that his career is over, but that he couldn't end his time at Harvard on a note that was, at least more in line with his own wishes and desires. But I think the letter in and of itself really speaks to the principle behind what he's doing here. And I think at the same time, he's a great example of how these elite institutions have preferred modes and preferred lines of inquiry when it comes to some of these tough issues like racism and sexism and all of these different things, that somebody like Cornel West, who is the intellectual heavyweight at that school, he doesn't step in line with those, those elite sort of ideas of what that should look like. He is a tour de force when it comes to talking about and actively fighting racism and fighting oppression. And because his ideas don't fit neatly into the elite box of what black academics should say, this is what happens.
Right. Well, I'm sure there are a lot of schools that would absolutely love to have him there. I went to St. Mary's College of Maryland, public school down in Southern Maryland. I hope he would consider something like that, to say, you know what, maybe these elite, screw these elite schools.
Absolutely.
Work with some public school, a public university or public college, somewhere where his talent is genuinely appreciated. But we'll have him on, I hope, later this week to talk more about this, and we'll have more for you today after this.